Hello BookTube. This is my January wrap-up of all my reading. I read 8 books this month, and that thumbnail is a complete lie. I think only a couple of books on here were actually physical books. That was a dramatization, and the library books already went back. So let's get into it with the 8 books I did read. First one being Edgedancer by Brandon Sanderson, which is an ebook, sort of a little story kind of to fill in between his big tomes of books in his Stormlight series, which is this alien world storm ravaged with an amazing magical system, which he's very good at setting up and explaining and exploring and stuff like that, and having big epic battles with kings and stuff like this. This focuses on a little girl protagonist who's snarky, and I think she's supposed to be comedic relief and might kind of get a little bit grating as we go along. But this book was, as we go along in the series, because I think she might be the Scrappy-Doo character, but and Sanderson in humor, he's dad humor, I think. But this was a fun little story. It's popcorn. It's probably not going to stick in my head for too long, and I'll have to refer back to my review video on it and the review of the last Oathbreaker, the big tome, to remember what the heck was happening in the series when the next one comes out, if I indeed go back to it, which I probably will, because they're fun and they're very immersive, and the Oathbreaker was easily long, but it does get you into that immersive thing. So yeah, I probably will. Next book I read was The Great Explorers, which is by Samuel Ellison Morison. It's a nonfiction. This is history book. It's the discoverers of America, and this is covering the northern and southern voyages with Cabot and Cartier, Columbus and Drake, amongst others. And Morison is this very elegant writer with kind of very good snarky sense of humor. Who really knows his naval stuff, really knows these voyages. These are originally published in the 70s, but it's got basically the weight of all his knowledge, of all his career behind him. He's a double Pulitzer Prize winner, and just joy to listen to. Amazing books. The next book I had was But It's So Silly, a cross-cultural collage of nonsense play and poetry by JonArno Lawson. This was actually a physical book from the library, and it's kind of a stealth memoir of Lawson's time on the playgrounds, asking kind of fellow parents from other kind of who've emigrated from other parts of the world. It's like, what kind of rhymes or stuff did you hear as a kid, and just sort of the core thing of all this nonsense and play and rhyme and song and poetry. Unfortunately, the translations really fall flat. There's a lot of translations of stuff from all other cultures, which in some ways really kind of serve to highlight that's the cultural gap, that experiential gap of, if you didn't grow up with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, it's hard to kind of get that across on the page, or to kind of it to resonate with you. And but the book was really good for Lawson's just general little thoughts and things throughout. It definitely is a collage. It's not a highly structured book. I mean, thank goodness it wasn't like a kind of a tome, a serious academic picking apart of nonsense or something like that, or of poetry. That wouldn't interest me in the least. This had a much more human, organic, playful thing to it, and I'm not so interested in sort of the baby, the kind of one-on-one infant stuff, but a lot of the older stuff, the adult play in the book was something that did interest me as someone who wants to nurture that playful attitude in my life, in my work. Both how I interact with other people, how I present myself out in the world. So it was definitely an interesting, worthy book that way. And So the next book I read was The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor LaValle, And this was a retelling of an H.P. Lovecraft story called the Horror at Red Hook, which was first published in 1927 in Weird Tales, and really shows H.P. Lovecraft at his most racist. This is where the horror is definitely immigrants and the evil kind of degeneration he thinks they're bringing into the world. And obviously all too topical thing as still, and maybe that's why Lovecraft is still resonates, still has its hooks into us, whether you're somebody who supports racists or somebody who reacts strongly against them. But we're still in a deeply racist culture, and maybe that's something it's struggling with, whether that's something, that fear of other, something so hardwired into us that it's impossible to ever to kind of wiggle our way out of. So it was an interesting book. The next book was Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, which is a science fiction novella ebook that I really enjoyed. This is a girl from the Hinta group of people who are actually a group of people in Africa right now, but Okorafor has imagined this future for them, which is in itself is a thing, because science fiction is all too guilty of just imagining, at least Western science fiction is all too guilty of imagining only Western white futures, and this does the revolutionary thing of actually saying, hey, you know what? There's a lot of futures out there, and they're not just all for people from North America or from Western Europe or stuff like that. So yeah, it was, and she's a really smart writer in the sense of, you think it's almost going to be like Binti is going off to this university, and she's getting on this spaceship to go there, and you think, oh, it's almost like Hogwarts or something like that. But it's like, no, it takes a big quick turn there, and it's like, oh, this is going to be a different kind of story. And this is the first in the series, and I can't wait to see where it goes, because I know it will be an unexpected way, and I like that unexpected newness in this book, in storytelling as well as subject matter. Next thing is Clive James' latest readings. Clive James was diagnosed with inoperable terminal cancer, it's leukemia, in 2010, and these are his latest, perhaps his last readings, and it's all these critical essays on stuff like Hemingway, Conrad, V.S. Nepal, some cultural things, but a lot of it kind of doing kind of his takes, his readings, his sharp readings on books. None of these essays are super gigantically long, kind of like, oh God, okay, you gotten too far in, and it's just like it bounces you out. No, these are kind of sharp personal essays of the best sort, of delving into his own stuff. It's very it's critical essay as biography. And when he talks about Hemingway not being able to deal with his decline, you can tell this is James talking about dealing with his own decline. So it's a very touching, very interesting book that way. The next book I read was The Disaster Artist, which actually I listened to with by Greg Siseros and Tom Bissell. And this is My Life Inside the Room, the greatest bad movie ever made. That's Greg Siseros, who was the co-star with Tommy Wiseau of The Room, which is just this awful, compellingly awful movie, where a movie is made up of all these little micro decisions, and you just have to imagine a movie like that where every micro decision, every macro decision was the wrong decision. Yet at the same time, the director, the star, the writer, Tommy Wiseau, is such this sincere, messed up, mysterious character that what he produced was bizarrely watchable, even with its kind of misogyny and its alien view of just human interactions in general. It's very striking book, and Greg Sestero does a really good Tommy Wiseau impression. So when he reads the book, he knows Tommy Wiseau, and I think he brings us some of that tone into the book as well. And his co-writer Tom Bissell is a professional writer, and I think he probably helped with the structuring of the book and making it into a very compelling thing of alternating from their past of when they first met each other, but intercutting that with the day-to-day making of the room, kind of the meat of the reason you're interested in this book, if you're interested in it, if you're going to be interested in it. And also it's Greg Sestero talking about just the room, making of the room itself. He doesn't comment on why it became this phenomenon, why it's this sort of Rocky Horror Picture Show where people go to group screenings and interact with the screen and have this genuine affection for this terrible, terrible movie. Whereas so many other movies like this would just, there'd be DVDs stacked up in another director's closet that would just never get seen by anyone. It would just be yet another sausage, rancid sausage in the Hollywood system, Hollywood factory, which this book is very good at showing, the Hollywood factory and just the grinding lack of romance, really, of that most of that Tinseltown is sort of the anti kind of the romance of the Ryan Gosling and La La Land. It's kind of the anti La La Land in a way. This is what you would actually go to Hollywood and end up suffering through. The last book I read was Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming, which is his memoir of his very difficult relationship with his father and his experience on the celebrity genealogy show, Who Do You Think You Are? Which, it's funny, I didn't mention that, but it's like, who do you think you are as a Canadian? That's a Alice Munro line of, who do you think you are? It's cutting people down, whereas I don't know if the genealogy show, well, sometimes I think, it's British, so there's a little bit of that, who do you think you are? It's like, oh, this is who you are, and finding out all these nasty things about your relatives. You have all these great stories of, it's interesting. This is another book where I don't know if Cummings had a ghostwriter or something like that, but it does feel like a non-writer's book in a way, in that it's hard to say because it's a memoir and it's talking about his feelings for his father, but it felt very narrow and very kind of pushing his viewpoint. He did a lot of telling me of how he felt about his father versus describing maybe his father, what his father was like. So I didn't really get a sense of his father. I got a good sense of how he felt about his father. But his father himself, it's like I was kind of trying to peer around, and you almost felt his father was very abusive and nasty piece of work. But paradoxically, I started feeling sympathetic towards him just because I wasn't allowed to make up my own mind about this man. And as someone who's had a very difficult relationship with my own father, I'm sure I was bringing some of that into it. So I do appreciate the book from that point of view of it's these books about fathers from somebody who's probably similar age to myself. It's a good way of sitting with that, and it affected me. I know that's something that I was a bit down, I think, for a while after that. Oftentimes I am after I've had a bit of a bout for whatever reason of having to kind of examine those feelings from my own past about my father. So it's tough and it's exhausting, but it was worth it, even though I don't think coming as a writer was really, his limitations showed as a writer, but I did appreciate that. So yeah, that's my January wrap up. I'll be going into February. Probably gonna do. I've started the Brothers Karamazov. by Dostoevsky. Ended up going with the Constance Garnett old translation. I looked at the Pavir and Volonsky, the Pavir and the translation, but I looked at kind of a chapter of that at the beginning and a chapter of just the old Garnett one, and the Garnett one's is free. So hey, I decided to go with that, and it's funny because I also have I happen to have on the shelves, I think I showed it in another video, was this, which is the David Macduff version of it, which also has sort of a similar feel to it, except it's tiny type. I must be getting old, but that's just like, oh, super tiny type. And also I can put the Constance Garnett on my phone and read it that way, as well as on my thing. And there's even a audio version of it. So between the three, having it on my phone, having it on my Kobo, having an audiobook probably at some point, though I think the audiobook is going to be the supplementary, because that's the one thing I've definitely learned doing these reviews, is that my retention audio wise is definitely a lot lower than getting that physical thing. And if the books get too chunky, like, it's funny, the Disaster Artist was perfectly great as an audiobook because it wasn't that demanding, where something like Binti, I found like I was rewinding a lot and re-listening to things because there's just much more of a kind of a chunky writerly stuff that I was missing stuff, and I needed to go back and get that again. So yeah, I'm gonna do the Brothers Karamazov. I'm thinking, because it's such a big book, and what I find is I'll read a whole book like that, and I'll get to the end, and it's like, okay, I can basically remember the last little hunk, but the other stuff at the beginning will have faded into kind of less kind of stuff. So I'm gonna make video notes. I'm gonna do I think it's a 4 parts and an epilogue or something like that. So I'm gonna try and do a video per part, and hopefully not be too tedious and too, I don't know, spoilerish. I'll try not to get into too much detail, but yeah, that's going to be a project for February, March, or hopefully maybe February. We'll see how long it takes me. I can be a slow reader, especially with stuff that's on the more needs more digesting point. And I guess I also have to just sort of see if making videos on each part, will that block me up for actually kind of going forward or not. Maybe it'll slow me down in a useful way, which I did find with some of these books. It slowed me down and made me like, okay, I have to talk about this and consider it, and made me hopefully more thoughtful and get more out of my reading, which is definitely one of the things I was looking for as becoming a newbie fumbling booktuber. So yeah, that was January, and that's a little preview perhaps of what February is. More videos later.